I am ready to go. Oh, we don't really have a cold open, do we? I'm all alone. I'm all alone. What did Libby do while Hans? Well, it was just her and Hans. Hans was like, we could get you the sound of tumbleweeds. So tumbleweeds blowing on through.
Yeah, hey, this is producer Sarah. Tumbleweeds don't make a good noise. Let's give Scott something a little bit more evocative for his emotional state this week.
It is that time of year. It's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics, and I am politics reporter Scott Greenstone. Libby is out this week. In the last couple of weeks, while we were super focused on Washington State, things have been churning along in Congress. President Trump has been pushing hard to pass what he calls his big, beautiful bill, which would extend tax cuts, add requirements to get benefits like Medicaid, and most likely massively increase the national debt. 2 Republican congressmen in Washington State voted for it last week over some concerns from local Republican officials. We've asked both of those Republican yes votes to come on the show. No dice yet. So I sat down with Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal yesterday to talk about the big, beautiful bill, which is actually the technical name of the legislation. We also talked about some big news here in Seattle, which Jayapal, represents in Congress, regarding a prayer rally hosted by a right-wing Christian group that sparked counter-protests and arrests and more protests and more arrests and maybe an investigation from the FBI, at least according to a tweet from a deputy director at the FBI. We also talked about Jayapal's clash with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, over student visas being revoked. And I do want to note that we talked before Rubio announced the administration would aggressively revoke Chinese students' visas. And on top of all of that, we got to a question from a listener, all in under 30 minutes, I think, something like that. So here is that conversation. Congresswoman Jayapal, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Before we talk about the other Washington, let me actually, can we dive into just the news of the day? Because I do want to ask really quickly about some continuing clashes in your district that the FBI says it is investigating. So there was this event on Saturday at Cal Anderson Park in Capitol Hill, a big prayer rally hosted by some Christian nationalist groups. The theme was #Don'tMessWithOurKids. And the groups preach that LGBTQ plus people are trying to indoctrinate youth. So gathering in Capitol Hill at a park named for a gay legislator garnered some reaction from local folks. Counter-protesters gathered, and 23 of them were arrested. Pepper spray was deployed. The city is getting some criticism that they mishandled the situation. Originally, the group wanted to rally in downtown Seattle, but they were denied that request. And then a Parks Department employee suggested that Cal Anderson would be potentially better, as well as maybe one other park. The group took them up on Cal Anderson. I know there are some tricky First Amendment questions here, but I'm wondering if you think the city should have handled this better with the event or the police response, especially now that it's apparently caught the eye of the FBI. A deputy director wrote on X that they're investigating allegations of targeted violence against religious groups. So should the city have handled this differently?
Well, I haven't had a chance to talk to the mayor or the police chief. I will be doing that just to follow closely exactly what happened. But to me, what's important here is, number one, you can't pick and choose when you want free speech and when you don't. So I really believe that it is important for us to stand up for the principle of free speech, no matter whether we hate the what's being said or whether we like it. And obviously, in this case, what they were saying is objectionable to me and to so many of our constituents in our district. At the same time, I think that the question here is that the city was protecting free speech of everyone. Could they have chosen a different place? Because Cal Anderson, in particular, has great meaning for the LGBTQ community. And so to do a rally in that spot And there isn't any requirement around free speech to do it in exactly the place that the person wants to do it necessarily in terms of a rally or a protest that the city has to approve. There is the possibility of approving a different space. And so I think, just like they didn't do it downtown, apparently, just according to the news reports, because they would have to have shut down the streets and it would have been impossible to manage. There are lots of considerations that get taken into account when you're planning, when you're allowing a permit for a space. So to me, that's the question here is it was particularly objectionable, I think, because of the place that was chosen. And obviously, we don't agree with the speech, but I just have to keep saying you can't pick and choose. And if you want free speech for Remesa Öztürk, who is the Turkish citizen who was arrested, snatched, and detained simply for writing an op-ed that she didn't agree with Tufts University's position on investments in Israel, in the Israeli government, then you also have to protect free speech here. Now, at the same time, I have to say what the FBI is saying and what the administration is saying is ridiculously hypocritical because they're talking about protecting freedom of religion. This was a Christian group. And they're saying they want to protect freedom of religion, but what about freedom of religion for Muslim students across the country? What about all the other protections of due process of free speech that they have been completely obliterating and smashing? And so I think in my mind, their investigation into this is absurd, just as it is into so many other things. It's cherry picking. I think for us as a city, this is just something we constantly have to contend with. And even on university campuses, for my time on these issues, I have long before I was a member of Congress, I always felt that you have to be careful about saying you don't want to hear the speech of some people or as hateful and horrific as it is, because in this country, our Constitution protects free speech, whether we like it or not.
Okay, so let's move on to the big bill news in the other Washington. The tax and spending bill, carries much of the president's domestic agenda. If passed, it would make tax cuts from 2017 permanent. It would create work requirements for Medicaid, strip tax credits from clean energy projects, and deeply cut spending. You called it a big, beautiful betrayal last night at your town hall.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because, well, first of all, they named it One Big Beautiful Bill. That's the name of the bill. This is sort of like, let's pledge allegiance to the king and call it the thing that he wants to call it. That's a ridiculous name. So everyone kept referring to it as that. And I said, this is one big, beautiful betrayal of the working class, of poor people. It is literally the largest transfer of wealth from working people and poor people to the millionaires and billionaires that we have ever seen in history. And it accomplishes that in two ways. One, it slashes all these incredibly important programs that Americans rely on. Americans in red states, Americans in blue states. It slashes Medicaid by about $650 billion. That's the largest cut to Medicaid we've ever seen. And it also slashes the Affordable Care Act tax credits and subsidies so that 14 million Americans would get kicked off of health care in total. That's according to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. In addition, you mentioned the green energy tax credits. Now, what's happening is a lot of those tax credits and projects went to Republican states. So Republican senators are now saying, whoa, wait a second, I don't want to do that. It also cuts nutritional assistance programs. So this is called SNAP. Basically, the nutrition assistance we provide to hungry people is the average of $2 a meal if you're hungry. That's it. That's what we're talking about. And it's a $300 billion cut to SNAP, the largest cut in the history of the program. It's about a third of the entire food assistance program for hungry families. It also sets up a $500 billion cut to Medicare. So every time these people say we're not cutting Medicaid, we're not cutting Medicare, we're not cutting Social Security, they are lying to the American people. So that's sort of like one giant piece of the bill is all the cuts. And then you say, well, why are they doing that? And it's so that they can give a $5 trillion tax break to the wealthiest Americans. If you're rich or if you had a giant lobby out in the halls of Congress, you did really well. If you're in the top 0.1 of 1% of the wealthiest, right, in this country, you get a $398,000 tax break. If you're one of the few millionaires in this country, you get about an $89,000 tax break. If you are in the bottom 20% of the country, you get $90, but you also pay more for healthcare, for nutrition assistance, because all of that got stripped. And those so-called tax cuts, which I call breadcrumbs, right? The wealthiest are getting gold bars and yachts, and people at the bottom are getting breadcrumbs. Those breadcrumbs actually disappear in a couple of years. Those are not permanent. They are temporary. The tax cuts for the wealthiest, they're permanent. So in a few years, what you will see is taxes shooting way up for the vast majority, about 80% of the American public will see tax increases, and they will see higher costs right now when this bill goes into effect.
You know, you talked about the Senate and the senators who are now sort of thinking twice about whether or not they'll pass it. Do you think, if they do, will it be in a form you think the Republicans in the House will pass? I'm wondering strategically, what version of this bill, things remaining the same as they are now, do you actually foresee becoming law?
It's very hard to tell because nobody really does what is good for their constituents on that side anymore. If they were doing what's good for their constituents, they wouldn't have voted for this bill. Dan Newhouse, Mike Baumgartner, all the Republicans except two voted for this bill. And the two didn't vote for it because it increased the deficit too much. They want more spending cuts. And so it's difficult to know, but remember it only passed by one vote in the House. So it's going to be a very difficult package to cobble together. And in the Senate, what I want to see is, do any of these senators have the gumption to stand up to Trump? Because nobody is standing up for their constituents. They're just doing whatever the president wants. And they start by saying they're opposed to these things, and then they find a way to still vote for them and call them something else. Like they're calling the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. They're saying, oh, this is about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. No, just don't be fooled by that. Everybody who can work that is on Medicaid is already working. And the only thing that these bureaucratic requirements that they put in do is they cut people off of healthcare. That's why the budget office estimates that 14 million Americans are going to be cut off of healthcare. And so let's see what the Senate does. One thing I think we should watch very closely is the Senate has a provision where you can't pass policy in a reconciliation bill. That's not true in the House, but it's true in the Senate.
Oh, okay.
And they put a bunch of policy into this bill and some really terrible things that Americans should know about. So one is that they have a provision that federal judges cannot hold any administration officials in contempt in any decision. So this is all about the protection for the Trump administration to do anything, including all the things that they've been doing on elections that judges have stopped them from doing. If there was no accountability around that, what would that mean for our elections? So that's a policy that's in there right now.
And this is a little in the weeds, but a reconciliation bill is not supposed to. The House can pass a reconciliation bill with policy in it. The Senate cannot. So will those policies be scrubbed out?
Well, here's the question, and I'll give you two others that I think are important for people to know about.
Sure. Yeah.
The second one that I want to mention is AI. It has a complete ban on regulating AI in any context. So everyone from our state insurance commissioner to, our elections officials are really concerned about this because it doesn't allow us to regulate AI in any way, including misinformation on elections, including the AI models that are used to hike up rental prices. There's all kinds of implications. So that's the second policy one that I want to call out. And then a third, near and dear to my heart, because I've been an immigrant rights activist my whole life, is it overturns something called the Flores settlement, which said that undocumented immigrant kids could not be indefinitely detained. Kids cannot be indefinitely detained. And it overturns that and says, nope, you can indefinitely detain kids. doesn't matter. So those kinds of things are in there. And so now what happens is in the Senate, they're technically supposed to go through the parliamentarian. And the parliamentarian who's
now
unelected
we're talking about the fun, exciting stuff.
is the one who's supposed to control whether or not something can happen. And then theoretically, the Senate listens to them. Now, I've always been in favor of eliminating the filibuster. And, because I think that they were going to do it. They already did it for taxes. They already did it for Supreme Court justices. They're going to do it for all the other things. And now they're talking about doing it via not listening to the parliamentarian. Had we eliminated the filibuster and not listened to the parliamentarian, we could have passed minimum wage. We could have passed, collective bargaining for unions. We could have passed voting rights. We could have passed getting money out of politics, all kinds of things that would benefit the American people. Now they're doing it. And they're talking actively about doing it so that they can pass all these horrible things.
I do want, you talked about your colleagues, Washington State Republicans who represent Yakima and Spokane in the U.S. House. Both of them voted for this spending bill. I thought if any Republican might vote against it, it could potentially be Dan Newhouse, the Yakima congressman. He has survived two, Trump-backed challengers at this point. He's got lots of local Republicans who sent, I think you received this letter too. A lot of local Republicans sent letters saying, hey, these Medicaid cuts, are troubling to us and we'd like you to vote no. I was reading his statement and, Newhouse says that, the one big beautiful bill, quote unquote, maintains investments in nuclear energy and the small modular reactor in the Tri-Cities, eliminating fraud and waste and, quote, protecting Medicaid for those who truly need it most. That's what he said as his reasons for why he voted for this bill. What is your response to that?
Well, Dan is a really thoughtful guy, and, he has over time survived, a lot of challenges for doing the right thing around impeachment and some other things, but around January 6th insurrection. And but I think that what's happening now is that it becomes a question of survival and staying in power versus doing what's right for your constituents. And I think that that's how perhaps, I don't want to speak for anybody, but that's how many of my Republican colleagues think about this. And it's just ludicrous in part because that district has, I think it's 70% of the constituents rely on Medicaid. And so it is a very, very, and this is actually true on Medicaid across the board. The cuts are disproportionately going to affect, they're going to affect everyone, but they're disproportionately going to affect red states because it's a federal-state partnership and it's based on how many low-income and poor people you have in your districts. And those are often very, very Republican districts and states. And it's also the Republican states that never expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. So there's all sorts of reasons why. If you look at Mike Johnson's home state of Louisiana, 60% of the births in Mike Johnson's home state of Louisiana are covered by Medicaid.
Wow.
I mean, people don't realize that Medicaid, if you're on Apple Health here in Washington State, that's Medicaid. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a state-federal partnership, but about 60% of Apple Health is funded through Medicaid. If you're a senior, 60% of nursing home stays in the country are funded through Medicaid, and almost half of long-term care, all long-term care, is funded through Medicaid.
Not Medicare, but Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Yeah.
We have about 18 million seniors who are both on are funded through Medicaid, both on Medicare and Medicaid in some cases. And so this is it affects the beginning of life with a lot of families who get their early childhood health care through Medicaid. If you're vulnerable population, if you have a disability, you're covered through Medicaid. And then we also have on the other side seniors and long-term care covered through Medicaid. So it is a very important program that serves over 80 million Americans. I mean, it is the nation's largest healthcare program. And I think that these Republicans know that it is bad news for their constituents, and they're still voting for it. And you can't hide it behind this waste, fraud, and abuse thing, because there's research study after research study that shows that there's very little waste, fraud, and abuse, just like Elon Musk went after Social Security and then set up an AI model and found 2 instances of Social Security fraud. It's the same thing here. There's so much research that backs up that all these bureaucratic cuts do is just kick people off of essential health care.
I do want to bring up another thing that that's in the news that you talked about last night at your town hall. You mentioned you might be the only member of Congress who came to the U.S. on a student visa. And I wanted to mention that because yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio paused interviews with foreign citizens applying to study in the United States. The administration, he says, wants to increase scrutiny of potential students' social media posts before they resume interviews. So kind of figure out how to, kind of screen people's social media before giving them a visa. I'm wondering, from your perspective, do students who maybe get denied entry to the U.S., hypothetically, because of things they say online, have any legal recourse? Where do you see this going?
No, there's really no legal recourse when it comes to a visa. I mean, you can certainly appeal again, you can apply again, but I think the important thing here, and I think there may be one other member of Congress that is on a student visa, I'm not sure. I'm actually having my staff look into it.
Oh, okay.
But I came in when I was 16 years old on a student visa, and it is the way that my parents sent me here by myself. And, I think the amount of work and preparation and money that goes into actually being able to come on a student visa is substantial from the student's perspective, but from the American's perspective, right? From us as a country and our citizens here. Foreign students are so important on so many levels. They've provided over $44 billion in money to our country, to our universities, to our economy, all of that, contributions economically. But perhaps even more important is the contributions to innovation, to talent, to research. So many foreign students come here to study and then stay here, become some of our top scientists, researchers, small business owners, big business owners. There's enormous contribution that comes. And what's happening now with the restrictions on free speech, and I just met with a whole coalition of global health advocates yesterday, because this is a big region for scientific discovery, innovation, not just cancer research, screenings, things that we do here in the country that affects Americans' health, but also globally. Yeah. And there is real problem with the fact that we're giving away this talent and expertise. And so a lot of students are choosing not to come here to finish their studies or to do their research because they don't want to be screened that way. They don't want to live with this uncertainty. And we are losing talent. We are losing innovation. We're losing economic contributions. And I think it's going to have massive, massive implications for us and our ability to stay as a country that is the most innovative in the world. Most of the pharmaceutical drugs that save lives around the world are developed here in the United States. And a lot of that comes from foreign researchers, collaborations with others. Now China is offering any researcher that can't do their work here in the United States, they're saying, listen, come to China. We'll give you all the funding you need to finish your research. The EU is poaching people from here. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing every single day of students who are just coming for university, to our universities here, who are saying, I'm not going to come because I don't want to be treated like a second-class citizen. I don't want to have my speech monitored. It's not worth it to me. I'll go somewhere else. I'll go to Canada. I'll go to the European Union. That's what's happening. And I know of so many examples of that right now where people are making those decisions not to come to the United States. That may be what Donald Trump wants. It is going to hurt America in the long term, in the short term, and, in the medium term, short, medium, and long term.
I am curious. So no legal recourse. I'm not sure if there's anything Congress can do. I know you were in about a week ago. You were in what CBS called a fiery exchange with Secretary of State Marco Rubio over what you mentioned earlier, Rumeysa Ozturk and the visa, her visa revocation because she wrote an op-ed. But yeah, he said to you, I'll continue to revoke student visas.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're able or Congress is able to do about that?
Well, there's two things. It's different if you're applying for a student visa and you're outside. There's not much recourse there.
Okay.
But if you've been granted a student visa and you're in the United States and then you are snatched and disappeared and detained unlawfully by the U.S. government, where your student visa is revoked simply for free speech, then that becomes a constitutional protection because you're in the United States and the Constitution doesn't distinguish on free speech in the United States. It says everyone has free speech, everyone has due process. There is a small provision that Rubio is using in the Immigration and Nationality Act that says that the Secretary of State can revoke visas for people who are considered a foreign, I think it's a national security or foreign security threat. And that's the provision he's using. But there is no threat to the United States of America from a student, a graduate student, writing an op-ed saying she disagrees. That is a free speech protection. And so that's in the courts right now. And so far, Ramesa Ozturk was released from detention. She was moved. She now has come back. She was released. This is a core free speech protection for everyone in the United States. And I think it's very important for Americans to understand that if the Trump administration can erode free speech for one group of people, they can do it for anyone. If they can ignore the Supreme Court telling them in a 9-0 decision that they have to bring back Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they can ignore the Supreme Court on any decision that affects your life. And if they can say there's no due process, period, we can just deport immigrants to third countries, including those who are here with legal status, then they can do that to anyone. They can erode anyone's due process. And I think that's the important thing that we have to recognize is these rights protect all of us all the time. And that's important. It protects people you like and it protects people you don't like. But it is a protection that is so central to what it means to be American that I think every American has to be concerned about this.
Before we let you go, we did put out a request for questions from our listeners. And I thought this one was interesting. I guess just sort of, there's been a lot of drama inside the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and Vice Chair David Hogg and another Vice Chair, I believe, have talked about primarying certain Democrats. And so Catherine, our listener, asked, I'm interested in Representative Jayapal's thoughts on primarying ineffective Democratic incumbents.
Well, look, I think anybody who wants to run should be able to run. I mean, I think you have to do your job. It's why I think I've done 125 town halls since I came to Congress in 8 years. It's why I have such important constituent services. We have some of the best constituent services in the country, in my opinion. We help people deal with the federal government, whether you voted for me or not. You can call my office. We will help on any federal issue. It's why I am constantly listening to my constituents. And I think if there are people who are not doing that and are Democrats or Republicans, anybody should be able to run. Am I going to be primarying my colleagues when I'm focused on how do we win back the House? I'm not focused on races that primary incumbents because I'm focused on winning back the House, and we can do that. I believe we will do that. And so I think it's fine for people to go out and run and to challenge somebody who's an incumbent. Just because you're an incumbent doesn't mean you get to stay there forever. And I think there are a lot of people who can be there for a long time and then decide that they don't really have to show up that much. And people get frustrated by that. So I think those are okay. I don't like all the money in politics. A lot of the primary challenges have come from big special interests, not David Hogg, but from people, that are representing billionaires and millionaires and industries. And that money is in the billions of dollars. And I think it poses all kinds of problems, not only to those individual races, but also to who we are as the Democratic Party, because, I've never taken corporate PAC money. I was, I think, one of only 4 members of Congress when I first ran to not take it. I still don't take it today. But the Democratic Party as a whole has to get away from taking all these giant corporate contributions and individual wealthy donor contributions that I think affect our ability to effectively stand up and fight for working people and the policies that are needed. And that's going to require change at the broader level, because that's certainly what Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others are doing, is throwing money into particular races. And I think we got to stop all of that.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal represents Washington's 7th District. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Our show is edited by Gabriel Spitzer. Our producer this week is Hans Anderson, with an assist from Sarah Leibovitz. I'm Scott Greenstone, and if you love Sound Politics, consider a donation. There's a link in the show notes or at kuow.org/politics. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.